I was an orphan, raised by the Grant family. The elders in the house arranged for Ethan Grant to marry me. I agreed happily, and he didn't object. But after we got married, his attitude toward me was cold and distant. Soon, he made the excuse of going away on business and left me alone for a long time. My mother-in-law despised me because I couldn't give the Grant family a son. She constantly found fault with me and treated me harshly. My entire life was spent waiting for Ethan and taking care of his mother until I became worn out, both physically and emotionally. When I was lying on my deathbed, the man I called my husband, Ethan Grant, never came to see me, not even once. Instead, Camilla Woods, his kind mistress, came to visit. She smiled softly and said, "Ethan's busy preparing for our wedding. He doesn't have time to see you right now. He said once you're gone, he'll marry me immediately." Then she added, "Claire, you've been Mrs. Grant for over 35 years. Meanwhile, I and our child still have no name or title in his family. Don't you think that's enough for you?" That was when I finally understood. Ethan already had another family outside. He had the woman he loved, and he even had a child with her. I was the only one left alone in that empty house. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the time when I still lived with the Grant family. Ethan's mother was smiling as she said, "Claire, do you like my son Ethan?" I shook my head and replied softly, "Not anymore." This time I wanted to live for myself, to do what I truly loved. I could still smell the faint scent of disinfectant from the hospital lingering at the tip of my nose. The dull ache of illness still throbbed in my body. In front of me stood Mrs. Grant, my former mother-in-law, the same woman who had once tormented me. She looked gentle and kind now, asking in a warm tone, "Claire, do you like Ethan? You've graduated now. Why not marry him soon?" In the living room sat close friends of the Grant family and my own parents. Back then, Mrs. Grant appeared gracious and soft-spoken, her face filled with warmth, nothing like the bitter, cruel mother-in-law I had come to know later. Because Ethan and I lived apart most of the time, I rarely had the chance to conceive. She used every possible method to torment me. She forced me to drink bitter fertility medicine every day without fail, invited statues of the Virgin Mary and fertility charms into the house, and made me kneel to pray for a child daily. But that wasn't the worst part. What exhausted me most were her daily words, half mocking, half scolding, that I had to endure day after day. She always demanded that I personally pour her tea, massage her shoulders, and knead her back. If I ever dared to resist, she would cry and complain about how hard it had been to raise me, an orphaned girl, and how she had treated me like her own daughter. She would remind me that when I had nightmares as a child, she was the one who held and comforted me. When I was sick, she never left my side. Those words always struck at my weakest point. I never had the courage to defy her. "Claire, don't be so shy. Say something," she urged, giving me a gentle push. Startled, I met her gaze and saw the flicker of impatience behind her kind smile. If I had paid closer attention in my past life, I would have realized that her impatience wasn't concern for me. It was because she wanted to hurry and tie me to Ethan, to secure her claim to my inheritance. Back then, I was just a pampered young lady who had suddenly lost both her parents. I thought I had found a new family, a place where I could belong, where I would be loved and protected. How could I have imagined the truth behind it all? But now, after more than 35 years in a hollow marriage, after enduring every cruelty once her mask of kindness had fallen, I finally saw everything clearly. So I stood up, smiled calmly, and said, "Aunt Linda, I think you've misunderstood. I only see Ethan as an older brother," I said calmly. "Besides, after graduating high school, I plan to apply to a university in France." Mrs. Grant's face instantly turned pale. In front of all these people today, she had asked me whether I liked Ethan, only to force me into confirming our engagement. That way, convincing me to transfer the assets under my name wouldn't be seen as suspicious by others. She quickly regained her composure, smiling as if nothing had happened. Standing up, she pulled me into a hug and turned to the guests with a laugh. "This girl is just shy, that's all. Ethan, why don't you take Claire for a walk in the garden?" Ethan was sitting on the sofa across from me, young, handsome, with a trace of aloofness in his expression. Because his father had been my parents' close friend, Ethan and I had grown up together, more or less like childhood sweethearts. When we were little, I used to cling to him all the time, pestering him to play with me. Back then, our relationship was good. But as we grew older, Ethan became distant. In my previous life, I didn't understand why. I thought maybe we were just at that age where boys and girls needed to keep a distance. I refused to admit the truth that he found me annoying. I was a spoiled, temperamental young lady who had been pampered all my life, while he had to follow whatever his parents arranged for him, including me. He didn't like me, but he couldn't cut ties either. Naturally, he grew weary of me. If he had simply ignored me, that would have been one thing. But he laughed at me instead. Laughed and then let his mother torment me. Laughed and then went out to have a sweet romance with Camilla Woods. I hated him, but I hated myself even more, for letting my emotions blind me, for living such a miserable, pathetic life. I clenched my fists, then slowly released them. Gently, I slipped out of Mrs. Grant's embrace, still smiling politely. That's not necessary, Ethan. You still have to meet up with your classmate, Camilla Woods, later. If you like her, you should introduce her to everyone soon. A few guests exchanged surprised glances, and someone chuckled. So Ethan already has someone he likes? No wonder his mother's trying so hard to play matchmaker. Only then did I look directly at Ethan. His face was even paler than his mother's, and his eyes were faintly red. I didn't bother to look any longer. I simply nodded politely to everyone, then turned and walked out of the living room. I went straight to the front yard and began searching through the mailbox. One envelope after another, I flipped them open until finally I found one addressed to me. Claire, Ethan's voice called from behind me. Startled, I turned around quickly and hid the letter behind my back. What are you upset about this time? He asked, frowning. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Yesterday you confessed your feelings to me, he said coldly, and now you're saying you only see me as a brother? Can't you stop acting on every whim? My mother sees you as her own daughter, and you just embarrassed her in front of everyone. I stared quietly at him. In my past life, after we married, his mother had humiliated me in front of others many times. When I once complained to Ethan, he scolded me instead. He said, "My mother treats you well enough, and you still can't stand a few words? How ungrateful can you be?" So this time, I returned his words exactly as he once said them. Your mother sees me as her daughter, right? Then why can't her daughter say a few honest words without you getting upset? He fell silent, sighing. You're really different today. Of course, I seemed different to him. In my past life, after my parents died, I had truly regarded the Grant family as my only refuge. I changed completely, from a proud young lady into someone submissive and compliant. I never dared to talk back to his mother. Even with Ethan, I was always cautious, always trying to please him. I laughed softly. So what exactly are you angry about? Didn't you hate that I was always clinging to you? Now that I've said I don't like you anymore, isn't that exactly what you wanted? I turned to leave. I still needed to read the letter I was holding. Ethan spoke again behind me. Claire, that's not. It doesn't matter anymore, Ethan, I interrupted gently without turning around. None of that matters now. Whether you love me or not, it doesn't mean anything anymore. When I said that, Ethan frowned. Can't you say a few decent words, Claire? You're still just as difficult as ever. After my parents passed away, I had no one left to rely on. Ethan's attitude toward me completely changed. Before, he didn't dare raise his voice, but now he openly complained that I was hard to live with. Hard to live with? The truth was, I simply refused to do everything his way. His so-called decent words were nothing more than an attempt to coax me into submission, to trick me into agreeing to an engagement. In my previous life, right after we got engaged, he used the excuse that his company was expanding and needed capital. He pressured me to withdraw most of my assets to fund his business. At that time, the country had just begun opening its economy, and opportunities to make money were everywhere. With my financial backing, Ethan quickly took control of the city's real estate and food markets, eventually becoming one of the most powerful businessmen in the region. For over 35 years of marriage, I lived like a widow. Everyone envied me for being the wife of a rich and successful man, but no one ever knew the truth, that without me, Ethan Grant would never have risen to such heights. This time, I would stand above them all and watch. The entire Grant family, dancing in their own vanity and greed, destroying themselves. Too tired to argue further, I smiled. You're right, I'm difficult. So what? If you can't stand it, then just deal with it. Back in my room, I couldn't wait any longer. I tore open the envelope. It turned out I still had an uncle, my mother's half-brother, Robert Miller. He had been living in the United States for many years. I had met him once before. Back then, he came to our home seeking help to treat his ailing mother. My parents assisted him generously and even introduced him to a reputable hospital. After that, both sides exchanged letters a few times, but in recent years, contact had been lost. In my previous life, I never knew that Uncle Robert's life had completely changed overseas. When he finally heard about my parents' car accident and death, a full year had already passed. After learning that I had been taken in by the Grant family, he tried to contact me by mail. The letter was sent to my old home, then forwarded to the Grant's address. Mrs. Grant knew there was a letter meant for me, but she deliberately hid it and never said a word. Years later, I learned that Uncle Robert had continued sending letters and even money for me, but by then, it was far too late. Reading his words now, I realized he couldn't return to the country for certain reasons, so he had written to keep in touch. This was the 10th letter he had sent. Its contents were similar to the earlier ones. He wrote about his life in America, offered comforting words, and asked whether I wanted to move there. At that time, the United States was a land of modernity and opportunity, known for its education and advancement. Enclosed with the letter were 10 large-denomination US dollar bills and a plane ticket to America. My nose stung with emotion. So I wasn't completely alone after all. I still had family. The departure city printed on the ticket was Hoover City, with the flight scheduled to depart in 4 days. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. My next step was to handle the assets my parents had left behind. Their real estate holdings were in prime locations. Those would remain untouched. They would appreciate in value later. The money, however, had to be divided into 2 parts, half to transfer overseas and half to keep safely in the bank. I didn't know Uncle Robert well enough yet, so I had to make sure everything was secure before reaching out to his family. Fortunately, college entrance exams had just ended, so I used the excuse of hanging out with classmates to go out and take care of personal matters more easily. When I entered the bank, I happened to run into a few of my friends. They cheered when they saw me. "We were just about to look for you. Come on, we're having a class reunion." The gathering was at the biggest karaoke club in the city. At that time, karaoke was considered a trendy pastime. When I arrived, Ethan was already there. Someone joked, "Hey, Ethan, where's Claire today?" "Yeah, where's your little wife?" another teased. Ethan flicked his lighter carelessly and said with a smirk, "She's such a nuisance. It's nice to finally have a day without her around." "And besides, I don't like Claire," someone piped up. The room exploded with laughter. "So you like the class beauty, huh?" The crowd egged on, shoving Camilla Woods closer to Ethan. The friend sitting beside me looked awkward and gave a small cough. The lights were flashing, and only then did everyone notice I had arrived. I walked in calmly, unbothered. "What a noisy place. Go on then," I said, and the crowd kept teasing. Ethan reflexively put out his hand to shield Camilla. "Claire, what are you up to this time? Can't you stop messing around?" he said. I wanted, more than anything, to stab those two right then and there, if I'm honest, but nothing like that happened yet. If I told them that those two had ruined me horribly in my previous life, who would believe me? I smiled brightly. "Ethan, if you hate me so much, why didn't you say so earlier? You're such a coward." Then I clapped once. "Fine, if nobody wants me here, I'll leave." Before anyone could react, I opened the door and walked out. Ethan hurried after me. At his words, Camilla fainted on the spot, and my classmates' screams rose behind us. Ethan abandoned me instantly and rushed to Camilla's side. I watched him coldly, then turned and walked away decisively. There would be no more chance for explanations. In 3 days, I would fly to America. From then on, I would forget him, and he should forget me as well. The next day, I cleaned my room, throwing away anything I didn't need. Mrs. Grant tried to hint about which university I planned to apply to, but of course I wouldn't tell her I was about to study abroad. I tossed out a random name, Ho City University, just to get her off my back. She praised Ho City University as if it were wonderful, then rolled her eyes and steered the conversation back to the marriage. We could get engaged first, and it wouldn't affect our university plans. Before I could refuse, she switched to a soothing tone. Aunt Linda already asked Ethan. He and that Camilla are just ordinary classmates. Don't overthink it. Still not convinced, she hurried to reassure me. Good girl, I'll make sure Ethan cuts ties with that girl cleanly. At that moment, Ethan, not understanding what was going on, stormed up to me with a look full of contempt and disdain. A spoiled young lady like you always wants the world to revolve around her, don't you? He sneered. Camilla comes from a poor family and is fragile. My only concern was to be a little kinder, and you make a fuss to show everyone. Then you go and tattle to my mother. He seemed to be venting all his anger as he yanked the crystal necklace from my neck. The crystal beads shattered and scattered across the floor. They rolled in every direction, vanishing from sight. He'd meant to give it to her as an apology, but now he tossed it aside. Let me be clear, I said. There's nothing between Camilla and me, but I won't ostracize her because of you. After I spoke, Ethan kicked over the trash bin I had left by the door. It spilled damp odds and ends, small toys, bracelets, trinkets, each piece skittering across the floor. His eyes were bloodshot. They were gifts I gave her, I said. Fine, if you don't like them, throw them away. I nudged a crystal bead with my toe. It rolled to my foot, irritating me. There were only 2 days left before my flight to America. The distance from Vegas City to Hoover City was considerable, and I needed to leave early to catch the plane. My passport had already been prepared when I applied for travel abroad. I didn't have much luggage. My valuable jewelry and the property papers were safely stored in the bank vault. Coincidentally, Mr. and Mrs. Grant were on a business trip in another city, so there would be no need to meet them for a final farewell. They had indeed taken care of me for many years, but only because of the inheritance I carried. The money my uncle sent over the years had been secretly kept by Mrs. Grant as her own. That alone was enough to raise me and fund my education all this time. Dragging my small suitcase downstairs, I spotted Ethan and Camilla Woods in the living room. The two of them looked like they had just returned from outside. My suitcase immediately caught Ethan's attention. Where are you going? He asked sharply. Running off to complain to my mother again? I had no interest in answering. I brushed past them. I'm going to stay at a friend's place for a few days. Aunt Linda already knows. I wasn't lying. I had already told Mrs. Grant that I'd be spending 2 nights at a friend's house. Ethan's tone was cold and dismissive, still sulking. Fine, just make sure you come back on your own. I'm not picking you up. It's fine, I replied flatly. Camilla, who had been standing silently the whole time, suddenly spoke in a frail, pitiful tone. Claire, I was kicked out of my home. I don't have anywhere to go. Ethan was just being kind by letting me stay here for a while. I heard Mrs. Grant say you were upset because of me. I'm so sorry. There's no need to apologize to her. Ethan cut in coldly, grabbing Camilla's wrist protectively. If it weren't for her always stirring up trouble, my mother wouldn't have bothered you at all. How touching. A pair of devoted lovers. I felt nothing but disgust and kept walking. Behind me, Camilla's weak voice carried on. Ethan, maybe you should go after Claire and talk to her? Don't worry about her, Ethan replied coolly, his voice filled with arrogance and disdain. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. Sooner or later, she'll come crawling back. I paused for just a moment, then continued walking, my steps firm. So that's what the Grant family thought of me, that I had nowhere else to go. Very well. The next time we meet, I'll make sure they understand exactly what it feels like to have no way out. On the first day after I left, Ethan didn't think much of it. On the second day, he began to grow irritated and restless. Is Miss Claire still not back? He asked one of the housekeepers. The woman shook her head. The handsome young man frowned deeply. Typical spoiled girl. If she likes staying out, then let her. Don't bother coming back at all. He said it angrily, but even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't stop himself from asking, did she say which friend she was visiting? The housekeeper shook her head again. This time, a strange heaviness settled over Ethan's chest, as if a weight pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. As he passed by my room, something caught his eye, a faint glimmer near the large potted plant by the window. He bent down and picked up a single, lonely crystal bead. For a moment, he froze. Then, as if possessed, he crouched down and searched the floor, hoping to find a few more. A wave of regret welled up inside him. Why had he ripped the necklace apart? It had been a graduation gift he'd planned to give me. Those sparkling things were what I loved most. He'd always known that. My temper hadn't been good, but after losing my parents, I had changed. He knew that too, so why had he kept pushing me, goading me until I broke? He told himself that once I came back, he would apologize properly. But one day passed, then 2, then 3, and I still hadn't returned. The uneasiness in his heart grew unbearable. He started calling my closest friends, but every answer was the same. No one had seen me. Refusing to believe it, he went to each of their homes one by one, yet still found no trace of me anywhere. Finally, he opened the door to my room. The once warm, cozy space now looked desolate and empty. The dolls he had given me were gone. My clothes and shoes had disappeared. The room felt so cold it sent a chill up his spine. Panicked, Ethan searched every corner, desperate to find some trace that I had ever lived there at all. In the end, all Ethan found was a single sheet of paper tucked beneath a book on my desk. On it were just 9 words, written neatly in my handwriting. "I've gone. Please don't miss me." Not even a period belonged to him. When my plane landed, I didn't immediately call my uncle using the contact information he'd provided. Instead, I hired a private investigator to look into his family's situation. Nothing too invasive, just enough to understand the basics, whether the family was harmonious, what kind of life they lived, and how stable their household was. I knew well that no family already burdened with their own problems would want to suddenly welcome a long-lost relative into their home. Fortunately, the information that came back was reassuring. My uncle, Robert Miller, owned a large ranch somewhere in one of the southern states. He was well respected in the local community, lived a simple life, and his family was close-knit and peaceful. Still, I prepared myself for the worst. If he turned out to be unreliable, I could still live and study independently in America. It wouldn't be the end of the world. Once the investigation was done, I bought a few gifts for everyone, then finally called him. The moment he heard I had arrived, he rushed to pick me up himself. 3 days later, I officially set foot on my uncle's ranch. Uncle Robert was more than 10 years older than my mother. Years of hard labor and chasing opportunity had left him looking older than his actual age. He wasn't much of a talker, and when he first saw me, he just looked at me for a long moment before quietly saying, "You look so much like your mother." Then he handed me a bank card and told me to use it freely. He took me horseback riding around the ranch and even let me tease his big dog. My aunt, Helen Miller, was a slightly plump white woman with a warm smile and an incredible talent for baking. Between us, her desserts were delicious, almost too delicious. But after a few days, I found myself getting tired of all the sweetness. Still, her kindness never wavered. Every day she tried a new recipe, baking different kinds of pastries just for me. My uncle's son, David Miller, was already married. His wife, Emily Chen, was Chinese American, and thanks to her, I got to enjoy authentic Chinese dishes at least once a week. My uncle's daughter, Sophie Miller, was only a year older than me. When she first saw how formal and conservative my clothes were, she exaggeratedly shook her head. "Oh no," she said, laughing. "Don't let those boring clothes insult your perfect figure." Then she grabbed me by the hand and dragged me into town for a shopping spree. Thanks to Sophie, I quickly blended in with her group of friends. By the end of summer vacation, it was time to start college. Through my uncle's connections, I enrolled at the same university Sophie attended. I chose to major in finance, not for any grand reason, but because, with the experience from my previous life and the capital I currently had, it was the most practical way to build a career of my own. Life in America turned out to be warmer and brighter than I had ever imagined. During school breaks, I relaxed at the ranch, sometimes helping out with small chores. At university, I studied alongside classmates from all over the world, listening to lectures together, tackling assignments together, sharing long study nights in the library. In my sophomore year, after completing a series of research projects, I decided to take a step forward and try my hand at a bit of business, import and export trading. I discussed it with Uncle Robert. He didn't object, he simply asked whether I had enough money. I do, I told him. Then he offered to introduce me to a few businessmen he knew. Of course, having someone to guide me would have made things easier, saved me some detours. But as a beginner, a few detours didn't scare me. I was young, had time, and had enough money to afford mistakes and learn from them. So, I teamed up with 3 classmates and invested in a small company specializing in exporting American food and clothing to neighboring countries. A year later, by the time I entered my junior year, the company had started making a modest profit. But my partners each had different plans. One wanted to branch out independently, another thought the business was too unstable and wanted out. In the end, the company dissolved. Still, the experience of running that experience running my first company had given me a wealth of lessons. I realized that if I could take control of the production process myself, become the source factory instead of the middleman, the profits would multiply several times over. So I began researching, laying out plans for a new venture I would launch before graduation. In my spare time, I used the money I had earned to buy Uncle Robert a car and purchased a small apartment near the university so I could live with Sophie. In that apartment, I adopted a whole colony of stray cats. Healthy ones, injured ones, abandoned kittens. I took them all in. Whenever the afternoon sunlight streamed through the balcony windows, those little bundles of fur would curl up and nap around my feet. I'd stroke one, tease another, and sometimes, without meaning to, my mind would drift back to my previous life. I had always loved cats. Back then, after begging Ethan for weeks, he finally agreed to buy me a small Siamese kitten. But only a few days after bringing it home, his parents began showing their disgust. They said keeping cats would bring bad luck to women trying to have children. His mother's words still echoed painfully in my mind. You can't even give our family a child, and now you're keeping that filthy thing? No wonder you're cursed. That tiny Siamese kitten, confused and trembling, had done nothing wrong. It just buried itself deeper into my arms for comfort. But in the end, I had to give it away to a classmate who also loved cats. I sent money and supplies regularly and visited whenever I could. Thinking of that, I lifted a long-haired orange tabby from my lap. It struck me then. How long had it been since I'd even thought about my past life? Since I'd remembered that wretched Grant family? It didn't matter anymore. I was happy now. I didn't need to carry the weight of that dirty past any longer. During the second semester of my junior year, my new company was officially established. The business specialized in dairy products, from raising dairy cows to processing and distribution. Step by step, I built a complete production chain. By the time I graduated, everything was fully operational, and my supply system was stable and efficient. With reduced costs, I could now negotiate prices confidently, both for domestic sales and exports. Once everything had settled, I finally brought up the idea of returning home to visit my birthplace. Uncle Robert didn't object. Sophie decided to come along. The moment we stepped off the plane, my blonde-haired, blue-eyed business partner, Anderson Blake, came rushing toward me, holding a bouquet of roses. He was the perfect example of a charming Western man. Handsome, tall, and effortlessly confident. His Mandarin was surprisingly fluent. "Claire, what a surprise, huh?" he said, grinning. I sighed. "Anderson, didn't you say you were busy negotiating that land deal? If you came with me, who's handling it now?" His blue eyes sparkled mischievously. "So in your heart, I'll never be more important than the company, huh?" "Of course not," I replied dryly. "Don't pretend to be pitiful." Sophie chuckled beside me, covering her mouth. "Wow, this guy's handsome enough to be your bodyguard?" She teased, then shot Anderson a thumbs up. "Good luck, Romeo." Buoyed by her encouragement, Anderson straightened up, full of confidence, and hurried forward to grab my suitcase. But before his hand could touch the handle, a tall figure stepped forward beside me. The man smoothly took the suitcase instead and politely opened an umbrella over me and Sophie. A strong, muscular arm extended in front of me, tanned skin stretched over defined veins. His deep voice was calm, but carried an edge of authority. "The car is ready, ma'am." It was Ryan Chen, my assistant and newly appointed operations manager. His tone was composed, his manner professional, yet his presence filled the space completely. When I looked up, I met a pair of dark eyes framed by jet black hair. His expression was unreadable, almost indifferent. He stood directly in front of Anderson, blocking him as if he didn't even exist. Childish. I cursed silently and climbed into the car. So much had changed back home. The first thing I did was visit my parents' graves. When I arrived, there was already a wilted bouquet of white chrysanthemums resting against the tombstone, gently swaying in the wind. Perhaps an old friend of theirs had stopped by earlier. I quietly moved the faded flowers aside, placed my own bouquet in front, and sat down before the headstone. I told them about my life abroad, about Uncle Robert, who had cared for me with such patience, about Aunt Helen, whose cooking could make anyone smile, and about my cousins, David and Sophie, who were now clumsy but loving new parents. When it came to my own life, everything was truly fine. I had family to lean on, people I could act spoiled with. I graduated with top honors and met many like-minded friends in the business world. "Mom, Dad, you can rest easy," I whispered softly. "Your daughter is taking good care of herself now." Rain began to fall, its salty taste brushing my lips. After we finished lighting incense, everyone prepared to leave the cemetery. Anderson held an umbrella over Sophie, while Ryan walked beside me. Just then, a couple passed by, the man carrying a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, the woman trailing behind, holding an umbrella and complaining in a shrill voice. "You come here every day, but you'll never see Claire again." She snapped. "I'm pregnant, Ethan. Can't you think about my feelings for once?" That voice, so familiar yet distant, made me turn instinctively. There was no mistaking them. It was Ethan Grant and Camilla Woods. Sophie, Anderson, and the others glanced at me the moment they heard my name. I shook my head slightly, signaling them not to react. Camilla kept talking non-stop, her tone grating. Ethan suddenly stopped, spun around, and snatched the umbrella from her hands. Then he threw it aside. "Will you shut up for once? You're so damn annoying." Camilla screamed, almost losing her balance. The two of them were on the verge of making a scene, right in front of my parents' graves. I quietly told the cemetery staff to intervene. As for why I didn't appear before Ethan myself, because my return to this country had never been for him. I was only here to assess the current real estate market. When doing business, it's best not to get tangled in bad luck, and he was exactly that. Still, misfortune has a way of finding you. When I visited my old home, I happened to run into one of my parents' longtime friends, an elderly gentleman who had also known the Grants. Not long after, he called Mrs. Grant to tell her I was back in town. She was ecstatic on the phone. "Claire, sweetheart, why didn't you tell me you were home? I've been so worried about you. Stay right where you are, I'm coming to get you." Before she could finish, I ended the call and handed the phone back to the old man. By the time Mrs. Grant and Ethan rushed over, my group had already gotten into the car and left. That evening, we checked into a hotel downtown. There was a formal banquet scheduled, a gathering for networking with major real estate investors in Vegas City. The event was grand and meticulously arranged. Having attended countless business receptions in the U.S., we were already skilled at handling these social rituals, raising glasses, exchanging pleasantries, maintaining poise. During the banquet, I struck up engaging conversations with several influential businessmen. Part of it was because I truly had my own business insights. The other part, because of the strong connections and reputation my parents had left behind. With both network and capital, everything was progressing smoothly. But midway through the event, a commotion erupted near the entrance of the ballroom. Mr. Zhang, the host and general manager of the corporation, frowned. "What's going on?" "Mr. Grant didn't have an invitation, but he forced his way in," one of the staff explained nervously. General Manager Zhang glanced at me. Of course, he knew my background, that I had once been raised by the Grants. Smiling politely, he said, "Ah, there must have been a mistake. Someone probably forgot to send him an invitation. Please let Mr. Grant in." Outwardly, I remained calm, but inwardly, I couldn't help finding the situation amusing. Forgot to send an invitation? Who would believe that? It was obvious, they simply didn't consider the Grants worth inviting anymore. Without my financial backing, the Grant family's small company had been barely staying afloat. Combined with the recent policy shifts, their business was practically on the verge of collapse. In such circumstances, who would want to associate with them? I didn't stop Mr. Zhang from letting them in. After all, No one here knew about the history between me and the Grants. If word spread that I had refused to see them, people might call me ungrateful. That would be bad for business. Best to keep up appearances. The moment they entered, Ethan's eyes locked onto me. The suit he wore had once been expensive, but now it was worn and wrinkled, probably creased from when Ryan had brushed past him earlier. He didn't even bother to fix it. Ethan strode quickly toward me. "Claire, you're finally back," he said. There was an almost desperate light in his eyes, like a dim lamp suddenly reignited. For the first time in years, the dull gloom on his face seemed to brighten with life. I didn't move. Just as Ethan was about to reach me, 3 people immediately stepped forward to block his way. Sophie frowned. "And who are you supposed to be?" Anderson crossed his arms. "What now? Another one?" Ryan silently rolled up his sleeves and took off his watch. "Everyone, calm down," I said dryly. "We're business people, not brawlers." Ethan's eyes were red. "Why are you acting like this?" I had no intention of reminiscing with him. "It's been a long time, Ethan. I'm busy. Please, help yourself." Behind him, Mrs. Grant pushed her way through the crowd. Using her age as an excuse, she squeezed past people shamelessly, tears already brimming in her eyes. "Claire, my dear," she cried, "why did you leave without saying a word all those years ago? Where have you been all this time?" She reached for me, her hands trembling as she tried to grab mine. I slowly pulled away. "Aunt Linda," I said evenly, "you received all the letters my uncle sent, didn't you? Why didn't you ever tell me about them? And besides, I left a note before I went." That was all I had to say. Everyone around us was intelligent enough to understand what it meant. The truth was plain. Mrs. Grant had deliberately hidden the letters from my uncle. She hadn't wanted me to find my family. She hadn't done it out of love, but out of greed, for the fortune under my name. There was no need to expose her further. The humiliation on her face said enough. Her expression shifted immediately. The tears vanished as quickly as they'd come, replaced by an awkward, brittle smile. "Claire, don't be angry. How was I supposed to know if those letters were even real? Oh, right. Ethan's been looking everywhere for you since you left. Why don't you two talk?" She grabbed Ethan's arm and shoved him closer to me. He didn't speak, just stared, his bloodshot eyes fixed on me with a look that made my skin crawl. I frowned slightly. Ryan stepped between us, his tone polite but firm. "Mr. Blake doesn't like anyone standing too close to Miss Claire." Anderson moved in from the other side. "Yeah, and for the record, even I couldn't win her over. So maybe take the hint, buddy." Ethan ignored them both, his gaze never leaving me. "Why did you leave?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea how long I searched for you?" I shook my head. "No, and I don't want to know." "Claire?" He pulled something from his pocket, a crystal necklace. "I fixed it. That day, I was going to find you and make up with you. I swear, I won't be foolish again." He spoke with a tremor in his voice, his eyes glistening with what looked like genuine remorse. Anderson glanced at the necklace and laughed out loud. "Seriously? You're trying to win her back with a cheap trinket like that?" Ethan shot him a dark glare, then turned back to me. "Whatever you want, I'll find a way to give it to you. Just don't be so cold to me." Once upon a time, I would have been moved. Back then, even a small toy he'd given me could make me happy for a whole week. Not because of its value, but because it came from someone I loved. But now, I couldn't even muster the energy to hate him, let alone like him. He was weak. Stripped of the emotions that had once blinded me, I saw him clearly for what he was, a man utterly unworthy of being my enemy. "I used to like that defiant streak of yours," I said with a faint smile. "You really thought you could control me? That's almost funny." "Claire," he said, panicking, "everything I said before, I didn't mean any of it. I was just angry." "It's fine," I cut him off, taking a champagne flute from a passing waiter. I swirled the glass lightly. "Does your wife know you're here meeting me? Don't bother me again. I'm here for business, not your melodrama." Ethan's lips pressed together, as if I'd struck something deep inside him. In my past life, whenever I'd wanted to talk to him, even for a moment, he would snap. "Stop bothering me, I'm working." And that so-called work of his? Spending his days and nights with Camilla Woods, playing happy family while I wasted away in silence. When Ethan saw that I was about to leave, he panicked. "Don't go. We can start over, Claire. Please, let's try again." Before I could even respond, Sophie threw her drink straight into his face. Shameless bastard, she snapped. You're married, and you still have the nerve to bother my cousin? Ethan's face went pale. I didn't mean to hide that I was married, he stammered. Claire, I just want to make things right between us. Please don't be angry. What happened with Camilla was an accident. She drugged me that night. I've kept myself for you all these years. Wait, I interrupted coldly. Could you not abuse that phrase? Kept yourself for me? Spare me the drama. There was nothing in his words worth getting angry about. Eventually, both Ethan and his mother were escorted out by Mr. Zhang's staff. The banquet continued until late, and when it ended, I found him still waiting by the entrance, clearly hoping to see me again. Before he could approach, a very pregnant Camilla stormed in, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. Without hesitation, she lunged at Ethan, hitting and kicking him. I'm carrying your child, Ethan Grant, she screamed. And you're still chasing after another woman? What kind of man are you? Pregnant women are often emotional, but instead of calming her, Ethan only grew impatient. Enough already, he shouted. Go home. The argument exploded into a scene. They were shouting, shoving, drawing everyone's attention. Mrs. Grant rushed forward to separate them, but in her haste, she pushed Camilla, who stumbled, then fell heavily to the ground. Blood spread rapidly across the marble floor, dark and thick. I turned away and got into my car, face calm. Through the window, I caught sight of Ethan abandoning his injured wife, running after my car and shouting my name over and over. Wow, Sophie muttered, disgusted. That man could win an Oscar for pathetic. Don't mistake it for devotion, I corrected her, glancing out the window. He's not chasing me because he loves me. He's doing it to stir my emotions, to get my help saving the Grant family. A man like him only ever loves himself. The business partnership that night turned out to be a success. Mr. Zhang and I, along with several other investors, agreed to co-develop what would become the largest commercial complex in Vegas City. Because the project required substantial groundwork, I needed to remain in the country for a while. Anderson, however, had to return to the U.S. Before leaving, he couldn't stop lecturing me. Claire, you know there's a Chinese saying, a good horse never eats the grass behind it. Don't you dare go back to that guy. Then, with a dramatic sigh, he added, also, I don't trust that bodyguard of yours, Ryan. His monthly salary couldn't even buy that watch you're wearing. Look at him, built like a tank. One punch from him and someone would fly 10 feet. Ryan, passing by silently, merely said, Ma'am, I also own a martial arts gym. It earns a steady profit every month. I gave them both a sharp look. I can afford what I want. Right now, all I care about is making money. Anyone who interferes with that gets fired. Anderson glared at Ryan all the way to the boarding gate, fuming as he disappeared into the plane. Ryan quietly tugged his sleeves down afterward, trying to hide his muscles, though with his broad shoulders and trim waist, there wasn't much point. Children, I thought, shaking my head. Ethan tried to contact me a few more times after that, but eventually, when he couldn't even manage his own affairs, he gave up. Not long after, tragedy struck. After Camilla's miscarriage, her relatives from her hometown came to Vegas City, demanding an explanation. The Grant Company had already been struggling, and with that chaos added on top, they collapsed completely. Camilla's family hired an excellent lawyer who helped her file for divorce and win the majority of the remaining assets. Mr. Grant, unable to bear the humiliation of bankruptcy, hanged himself in the old company office. Mrs. Bliss Grant suffered a severe mental breakdown. She spent her days muttering nonsense, lost in hallucinations, scolding an invisible daughter-in-law, mumbling about incense and prayer. If you don't take the fertility pills, how will you give birth to a son? If you don't kneel before the Buddha, how will you give Ethan a child? Eventually, she went completely mad. She wandered the streets aimlessly until one day a car hit her. The accident left her paralyzed for life. Desperate to pay for his mother's treatment, Ethan went to Camilla to beg for money. But most of her assets had already been taken by her relatives. Camilla herself couldn't escape the mess she'd created. She still harbored deep resentment toward the Grants, so even if she had the money, she wouldn't have helped them. Their arguments grew more violent each time, until one night, Ethan lost control. In the middle of their fight, he grabbed a knife, and Camilla died on the spot. Ethan was arrested immediately. As for me, With what people called a kind heart, I paid a visit to Mrs. Grant in the hospital, and even covered her medical bills. Everyone praised me for being so generous, so full of compassion. No one knew that the caregiver I'd hired for her was the worst I could possibly find. It didn't take long before Mrs. Grant's body broke down. Her skin was covered in festering sores, the stench unbearable. I stood by her bedside, smiling faintly as I looked down at her frail form. "Aunt Linda," I said softly, "I'm sure you remember now, don't you? When you tortured me back then, did you ever imagine this day would come, that you'd fall into my hands? You knew Ethan had another woman," I continued, "yet you still blamed me for not giving you a grandchild. While I was choking down those bitter fertility pills, kneeling and begging before your precious Buddha, you were happily cradling Camilla's baby, your real grandchild. Now it's your turn to taste the same pain I felt all those years ago." Mrs. Grant's eyes went wide with fury. Her hands twitched violently, reaching for me, but she couldn't even touch the hem of my sleeve. Drool leaked from the corner of her mouth as her lips trembled with unspoken rage. I wouldn't let her die easily. She would live, if you could call it living, trapped in her own body, rotting slowly, day by day. Before Ethan's execution, he requested to see me one last time. I agreed. When I entered the visitation room, he broke down instantly, tears streaming down his face. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Claire, I keep seeing things, memories that don't belong to me. I see how cold I was, how my indifference in our past life left you lonely and broken. Can you forgive me? I loved you, but I was too much of a coward to face it. My parents controlled everything. When they told me I had to love you, I fought back, stupidly, just to defy them. I was immature, and now I've lost everything." He sobbed uncontrollably. I simply shook my head. To my surprise, he laughed, a hollow, broken laugh. "Fine. Hate me then? Maybe this miserable ending is my punishment. Maybe this is karma." I couldn't help but smile. "Karma?" I repeated, my voice soft but laced with amusement. "Do you really think the universe is that precise?" In the reflection on the glass wall, I saw my own face, calm, but glowing with satisfaction. "Tell me, Ethan," I said slowly, "did you really think your company collapsed because of bad market conditions? Did you think Camilla just happened to crash that party? That her miscarriage was some tragic coincidence? That her poor relatives magically found a team of top-tier lawyers?" His face drained of all color, his lips trembled, his eyes bloodshot. You hate me that much?" "Why wouldn't I?" I whispered. "In my past life, I never did anything cruel. And yet your family ruined me. They stole my inheritance, destroyed my body and spirit, and left me to die alone, all because of greed. So this time, I merely gave fate a little nudge. That's mercy, Ethan. The rest, you all brought upon yourselves." I stood, smoothing the hem of my coat. "When they announce your execution, I'll make sure your mother hears the news." Then I turned and left. Outside, rain poured relentlessly. I climbed into the black car waiting for me, the city lights shimmering on the wet pavement. Through the tinted glass, I watched as the newly developed district came into view. Steel and glass towers rising one by one, their reflections stretching across the skyline. The future, the one that belonged to me, was finally taking shape.